Hey y'all, welcome back, and in today's video we will be painting this watercolor seahorse. I'll be using Arches 140-pound cold press paper, a variety of black velvet brushes, and I will put the paint colors that I'm using up on the screen. They are all M.Graham colors. And right now I am wetting the entire background before I lay in a light wash of where I want all the colors to pretty much go in the seahorse. And in the top right corner you will see the photo reference that I use from Pixabay. I will try to link that down below. And I wet the entire page. You'll see towards the end when I get to where I'm doing the background that a lot of the colors from the seahorse that I'm painting in right now bled out, and it just kind of helped incorporate the animal into the background a little bit better, I think. Right now I am using yellow ochre and nickel azo yellow. That's what I use to lay in all of the yellows. I just wanted a warm yellow and a cool yellow because if you look at the picture you can see up towards the back of his neck and the top of his head there are very warm yellows, and also in the shadows on his tail some of the yellows get really warm. And I just wanted the option to be able to go warm and cool with my yellow. And then I mixed in some blue and put some greens that you see hints of down in his tail and on the front of his stomach. And here I'm mapping out very, very lightly where I want the purples and the blues, because at this point I wasn't exactly sure where I was going with this guy. In fact, after this, he sat on my desk for days, probably a good week and a half before I touched him again. I looked at all of the colors that I have on here right now and was like, I have no idea how to make this look good. And I just had to think about it for a while. So when I finally came back to it and I started here, I still had very little direction, but when I don't have the direction and I just don't know what to do, I usually start with the face and the eyes, because I know that that is going to be my tightest area, my most detailed area. So if I get too fiddly or too tight, it's okay, because everything outside of the eye, everything in the animal past the eye, I try to make looser as you move away from it, because most of the time I like the eyes to be the focal points. Now here, from a technical standpoint versus a compositional standpoint, I am just pretty much paying attention to what is underneath all the spots and all the wrinkles and all the shadows. I ignore the shadows and the spots, and I just pretty much focus on the color transitions that are happening underneath all of that noise, all of that extra stuff, all of the details. I'm just focusing on the color transitions, because all those other things can come back. We can come back and we can add them later. I also really, really love the transition behind his eye and into his cheek area right there. It goes from like a blue to a dusky purple and then to that pink. So I really tried to play that up. And now what I'm doing is putting in some darks just so I can have something to judge the rest of the body by. I try to find places in a painting where it's safe to put my darkest spots, and it just helps you judge the value throughout the rest of the painting. So up around the eye and right behind the eye are probably going to be some of the darkest places that I have in the whole painting, but a lot of the places on the belly are going to be really dark too. And having those darks on the page up against that bright white just helps me as I move down the painting not have to go back over and over and over again glazing, because I should have just put more color in to begin with the first time, and it can be very time saving. Also, from here on out, I'm pretty much just applying paint to dry paper and then bleeding it out with clear water. I'm not going to use any more wet on wet other than what I wet doing this method. I mean, you can always drop in a little bit of color here and there into some paint that you just laid down. But as far as wetting the whole seahorse again, we don't do that. We're not going to do that. So it's quite easy when you think about it in very small sections. The only thing you really have to do is put a stroke of color down or a few strokes of color down in the area that you want, and then take your clean brush and soften that out. So it's a very controlled method, and it's a lot easier to get things how you want and the saturation that you want, especially in a small area or a small painting like this, versus wetting the whole thing down and praying that the paint does what you want it to do, because we all know watercolor never does exactly what you want it to do. So here I'm going to start working on the body, putting in some purples and pinks around the neck. And as we move down towards the belly, the purples will turn into blues and some greens. And this is going to be one of the darkest spots on the animal, minus the face. So I'm going to get it pretty dark, and it's just going to set the tone for the rest of the painting pretty much, because I did exaggerate these colors. I didn't want it to be quite as boring as the reference, though it is a great reference. I wanted there to be more color. I really enjoy painting things more colorful than they are and bringing out those hidden colors. And so when I saw this guy and all the subtle little rainbows that he had in his skin, I just knew that he was going on paper. And here I'm about to pull some of that yellow down into the body. So that way that yellow kind of continues down and through the painting, because most of the tail is going to be yellow. As I get towards the bottom of his body and more into where the tail joins it, I'm using some burnt umber and some quin red and some azo yellow, and we are just trying to leave some white spaces in the center of the tail because we don't want to lose all of those. But I'm also trying to map out all the little ridges on the tail, so that way I can go in and deepen all those colors up and the shadows in those areas later. So here we're just darkening up the shadows on the stomach of the seahorse to just make sure they're dark enough and that the animal has that rounded 3D effect. A lot of times when your paintings look flat, it's because you don't have enough contrast in your shadows. And you either have too many lights or mid values and not enough darks, or everything is the same value. So here I am going back through the face, and I'm adding a little bit of that texture and the dry brushing that I was talking about earlier. I'm starting to work my way down the sides and the back fin of the seahorse, and he had these pretty little black spots on the back of each one of those little bumps or ridges. So I kind of played those up and exaggerated them a little bit, and I'm going to come back and make that yellow just a little bit darker right there, but now we're going to put in some spots, and putting in spots can be a little bit scary, but just remember that you can always dab them out really fast if you're quick. And especially if the paint is thick like this, it's usually pretty easy to dab them out if you need to. But dabbing can also add that extra layer of dimension. So you see some of my spots are lighter than others, and that's just because I was either A, putting the paint on thinner and making them lighter, and then some of the spots I used thicker paint, or I didn't dab them. I did a little bit of both, and that just adds dimension and it makes it look like it's not flat. If all the spots were the same color, then even with all the shadows and the highlights, you know, all the midtones being there, it still might look a little bit flat. Now that we're working on the tail, you'll see that I also exaggerated those colors just a little bit as well. Towards the top, it is more yellow, and as the outer side of the tail goes down, the colors switch from yellow to green. And even towards the end of me painting the tail, you'll see that I drop in some blues at the tip of the tail, and the underside where I'm painting right now will consistently get darker and a little bit cooler. I didn't really like that color too much when I put it in. I thought it just stood out too much against all the bright colors that were in the body that we just got done painting. Here you can see me trying to deepen some of the shadows in the tail and pull some of that blue color into it. And up towards the top of the tail, I'll start adding some pinks and purples. There was a spot right on the back side of the tail right there that even had some of the speckles that the body had. So I figured if I pulled those colors down into the tail, it would just help make the seahorse a little bit more cohesive. And here I'm just trying to wrap up the seahorse. What I like to do when I get close to complete for any painting at all is take a step back, walk away from it for a few, and then you want to come back and you want to look at it and not even necessarily look at your reference photo, or at least just don't focus on that reference photo. Look at the actual painting and see what it needs and see what you think you can add to make the painting look better. Everything in the painting doesn't have to mimic what's on that reference photo. You don't have to copy the picture. So you can see me here just adding a few details in where I think that they need to be added. And then I'm going to start the background. Now, it's always intimidating to start a background, in my opinion, on a fresh white background with a nicely painted subject on it, and you kind of get scared. You don't really know what you want to do. But in this case, I decided that I was going to put some thin light washes on the back of the phthalo turquoise mixed with a little bit of that anthracnone blue, and you'll see I get a little bit heavier with the anthracnone in the mix as I move towards the left side of the seahorse, and a little bit heavier with the phthalo as I move to the right side of the seahorse. I chose to go with these light vertical lines in the background against the very organic shape of the seahorse, just because I thought that once I added all the contrast into the seahorse and all the darks that I did, that the background in the photograph would have taken away from all the time that I spent painting the actual seahorse. Now I'm just going to get fiddly and go over the painting one more time and look at everything and make sure it's cohesive. Like I said, you don't have to follow the photo reference exactly. So at this point, what I'm doing is I'm just looking at my actual painting and seeing what it needs, and seeing if I can add anything to the painting to make the painting look better, not to necessarily make it look like the photograph. And I missed a few little white spots on the back of his neck right there and in his fin, so I'm using some white gouache just to bring a few highlights back. I don't like to use gouache all the time, but it's one of those things that is a personal preference, and you have to ask yourself, will it add to my painting or will it detract? And I believe in this case it added to, and I kept it to a minimum. And that's it. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Links to my social media will be down in the description box. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I will see you guys in another video really soon.